When did you first realize that your parents were bad at parenting? When I was 12, my parents started leaving me home alone for entire weekends while they went to marriage retreats. They'd stock a fridge, leave $40 on the counter, and remind me not to answer the door or tell anyone they were gone. At first, I felt so grown up. No bedtime, pizza for breakfast, staying up all night playing video games. But by the third weekend, I started noticing things. Like how our neighbors, the Johnsons, would peek through their curtains when my parents loaded their car Friday afternoons. Or how Mrs. Peterson next door started finding excuses to check on me, bringing over extra cookies or asking if I needed help with homework. The fourth weekend, something went wrong. Our power went out during a storm Friday night. I sat in the dark for hours, too scared to leave the house or call anyone. When Mrs. Peterson saw my flashlight through the window, she came over immediately. "Where are your parents, honey?" she asked gently. I lied, said they were just running errands. She knew I was lying, but didn't push it. She invited me to stay at their house until the power came back. I spent the weekend with their family, playing board games, helping cook dinner, watching movies together. It felt so normal, so warm. When my parents came home Sunday night, I was already back in our dark old house, pretending I'd been fine alone. The weekend visits to the Johnsons became regular. Mrs. Peterson would text me Friday afternoons. "Power's looking unstable tonight, might want to come over just in case." We both knew the power was fine, but I'd grab my backpack and spend the weekend with a family that actually wanted me around. Then one Friday, my parents didn't leave. Dad had gotten sick, so they canceled their retreat. I was disappointed, which should have been my first clue. When Mrs. Peterson texted about the power situation, I told her my parents were home. She replied, "Oh, good. I was worried about you spending another weekend alone." Another weekend alone. She knew. She'd known the whole time. That evening, there was a knock at our door. My parents were in the living room, talking quietly about some work matter of my father's, something that, as always, they didn't tell me about. The knock was firm, insistent. My mother looked at my father, and he grumbled before getting up to answer. I was standing in the hallway trying to listen. As soon as the door opened, I recognized Mrs. Peterson's voice. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Sorry to show up like this, but we need to talk." She wasn't alone. A tall man with a serious expression, wearing a vest with Child Protective Services written on the back, was beside her. My father immediately changed his tone. "What's happening? Is there some emergency in the neighborhood?" he asked, trying to seem cordial. "Actually, it's about your son," the counselor replied, looking directly at me as I hid behind the hallway wall. My mother stepped forward, not hiding her irritation. "Look, this must be some misunderstanding. We're excellent parents. He's safe at home, always." The man remained calm, but his expression didn't change. "We've received reports of child neglect. From what we've been informed, your son has been left alone at home frequently, for entire days, including during storms and power outages. The neighbor reported having taken him in more than once." Mrs. Peterson nodded, not looking away. I couldn't stand by silently anymore. He would stay here, alone, scared. And you pretended this was normal. My father got agitated. "Excuse me. We are responsible adults. We go on religious couples retreats. That's not a crime. We leave food, money, and he's 12 years old. Not a baby. Leaving a minor alone for days isn't just irresponsible, it's illegal," said the counselor, opening a clipboard. "Child Protective Services has already opened an investigation. For now, we're just notifying you. But depending on what's discovered, there could be legal consequences. We need to talk to the boy now." My mother tried to prevent it, claiming I was already sleeping, that it was late, but the counselor ignored her and called me. "Son, can you come here for a moment?" My legs were shaking. I wanted to run to my room, hide, disappear, but I walked slowly to the door. Mrs. Peterson looked at me with an affection that made my chest tighten. She whispered "Everything will be okay," that almost made me cry. "Can you tell me if your parents were home the last few weekends?" he asked, crouching down to my height. I looked at my parents, who stared at me with pleading eyes. Then I looked at Mrs. Peterson. I took a deep breath. They left me alone. They'd leave on Friday and only come back Sunday night. My mother huffed. "You're exaggerating. We always came back early." But the counselor wrote everything down. "And you stayed alone? With no one to take care of you?" I nodded. "Just me and the TV. Sometimes the power went out and I got scared. But Mrs. Peterson helped me." From there, everything seemed to move fast. He asked to talk to me privately at the gate, away from my parents. He asked me questions, noted details, asked me to remember dates. He said a social worker would come visit the house. When we said goodbye, he gave me a card. If this happens again, call me. This isn't your fault. My parents slammed the door shut as soon as he left. My mother started screaming. You told them everything? You want to destroy our family? You want the police to come here? My father said nothing. He stood there, pale, staring at the wall as if he'd been punched. That was the first night I realized they were afraid. Not of me, but of being discovered. The next morning, my mother went to Mrs. Peterson's house, not to apologize, but to threaten. You've crossed the line. This is slander, defamation. If my son is taken from me, you'll pay dearly. Mrs. Peterson remained calm, as always. I'm not afraid of you, and if necessary, I'll report again. He deserves more than absent and selfish parents. She slammed the door in my mother's face. I watched everything from my bedroom window, and for the first time, I felt that maybe I wasn't so alone after all, and that's when the neighbor war began. On Monday, when I came back from school, there was already a black car parked discreetly across the street. At first, I thought it was some new neighbor, but I noticed that vehicle appeared every time I came home, and disappeared after a few minutes. A man in dark glasses was always inside, watching. It was as if the entire neighborhood was under surveillance. And however strange it was, this gave me a sense of security. Someone, somewhere, was paying attention. Something my parents never did. Inside the house, the atmosphere was different. My parents started walking in silence, as if a louder step would bring the police into the living room. My father had stopped going to work for a few days and was always talking on the phone with someone, probably lawyers. My mother no longer looked at me. Not because she was sorry, but because she blamed me for everything. She started making indirect comments. Some children don't know how to value the freedom they have. Or, at least now we'll be investigated like criminals because a certain ungrateful child decided to play victim. But I wasn't stupid. I saw the desperation in their eyes. I knew they were trying to clean up their own image. Suddenly, they started preparing elaborate dinners, filling the house with fruit, leaving the door ajar so neighbors could see that everything there was normal. But no one believed them anymore. At school, the story had already leaked. One of the Johnsons' children told classmates that the parents of the boy from number 18 abandoned him every weekend. Some mocked me, called me the neighborhood orphan, but others seemed uncomfortable. The principal called me to talk privately and asked if I wanted someone from the school to follow my case. I just asked to be left to study in peace. On Friday, once again, my parents announced they would take a quick trip. But this time, they didn't invite me or try to lie. They knew they were being watched. When they left, a patrol car slowly passed by the street. For the first time, I locked the door and felt that house was mine. I rang Mrs. Peterson's doorbell, and she received me with a warm hug. I was expecting you, she said with a smile. Today we have lasagna. Her house was small but full of life. Photos on the walls, smells of good food, the television on at a comfortable volume, and people talking, laughing, caring. Her son, who was older and already working, asked if I wanted help with homework. Her daughter taught me to play chess that night. And on Saturday morning we had breakfast as a family. Their family. But I felt part of it. On Sunday, around 7 in the evening, when my parents arrived, there was a social worker waiting for them on the sidewalk. She asked to come in. The conversation was long, with notes, questions, and that heavy atmosphere that not even my mother's fake smiles could disguise. When the social worker left, my mother broke down. She threw a glass against the wall. She screamed that I was a traitor, ungrateful, an ungrateful boy who would never understand the sacrifice they made for me. What did you want? For us to stay here every weekend just because you're afraid of the dark? We need to save our marriage, but you're too selfish to understand that. It was at that moment I knew none of this was about me. They didn't want to protect me, take care of me, ensure my safety. They just wanted to live a life without responsibility, and I was a burden they had to carry. The following week, the war with the neighbors became a storm. My mother started sending anonymous notes to Mrs. Peterson's house, threats disguised as passive messages. It's very dangerous to meddle in other people's lives. Gossiping neighbors should take care of their own family. But nobody was foolish. Everyone knew where they came from, and the response was appropriate. On Thursday, when I got home from school, a banner was hanging on the Johnsons' house porch. Children deserve present parents. Protect your children. My heart beat fast. It was as if I had allies. My parents, however, went crazy. They said they were being persecuted, that there was a conspiracy, that they wanted to destroy our family out of envy. On Friday, the social worker returned. She said the investigation was progressing and that, for now, Child Protective Services would determine a precautionary measure. I could no longer be left alone at home during weekends. If my parents went out, they would have to take me or arrange for the presence of a legal guardian on the premises. My mother almost had a breakdown. "This is absurd! This boy is going to destroy our reputation. You've already done that yourselves," was all I could answer. She slapped me, the first time, Sion, in front of the social worker, and that was enough. The report was reinforced. Shared custody became monitored. Psychologists, weekly visits, new testimonies, and my parents knew it was no use pretending anymore. That entire neighborhood had turned against them. But I didn't feel alone anymore. I had the truth on my side. And now it was the truth that would start to hurt. After the slap I received in front of the social worker, everything changed. The report was reinforced, my case became closely monitored, and the confidence my parents once had in impunity was crumbling day by day. Mrs. Peterson started following me closely. Even with my parents still trying to maintain the facade, she knew that sometime they would do something worse. And it was one afternoon, while she was helping me with homework, that she approached, sat beside me, and spoke seriously. "Listen, dear, I know you've been strong and I admire that, but I need to teach you something. If something happens, if you're alone, if they do something that hurts you or makes you afraid, you're going to take this card." She placed a laminated card in my hand. "See this number? It's from Child Protective Services. No matter the time, if you call and say you're Lucas from case number 2073, they'll understand, and you tell them everything, without fear, understand?" I nodded, clutching the card as if it were a life jacket. She put her hand on my shoulder, and I felt as if, for the first time, someone was really protecting me. And she was right. My parents started changing strategy. After the precautionary measure was decreed, they could no longer leave me alone, so they started locking me in. Literally. They started going out secretly, saying they were going to the market, and took the keys. They locked all the doors from the outside. At first, they left the cell phone with me. But one day, when they saw I had received a message from Mrs. Peterson asking if I was okay, they took that too. "You're making us look like monsters, Lucas. You're going to learn to obey now," said my mother coldly, without any trace of regret. That Friday, both of them went out at sunset. The sunlight was still coming through the window cracks. But the house was darker than ever. I felt like a thing, not a person. Someone left aside, stored like an unwanted object. No food, no contact with anyone. Not even the TV worked properly. The windows were all locked with keys, including the kitchen one. I sat on the bedroom floor, took the card hidden in the bottom of my backpack, and cried before doing what I had to do. I dialed the number. My hands were shaking. "Child Protective Services. Good afternoon. It's Lucas, from case 2073. My parents left me locked up again. They took everything. I'm alone and can't get out." The voice on the other side changed immediately. It became firm, direct. "Lucas, are you safe now? Did they hurt you?" "No. They just locked me up. I can't talk to anyone." "Okay. We're coming there now. Stay calm, okay? We're going to get you out of there." I hung up and stood still, looking at the door, as if it would explode at any moment. And it was almost that. Less than 20 minutes later, I saw red lights flashing through the living room window. 2 cars, one from Child Protective Services, another from the military police. The social worker I knew got out of the car with a folder in her hand, eyes fixed on the house. It didn't take long for the neighbors to come out curious, and everyone saw. They broke down the door. When they entered, I was still sitting on the floor. The social worker ran to me. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "You were very brave, Lucas. We're going to solve this now." Meanwhile, one of the police officers had already called to locate my parents. They asked me to put on a shirt and took me out of the house, to Mrs. Peterson's house, where I waited. I saw everything through the window. My parents arriving in a hurry, pale, surrounded by 2 police officers who were already waiting for them at the gate. My mother was trying to justify. "It was just for security. He has a habit of going out. We're trying to protect him." But nobody believed anymore. This time the reaction was immediate. The duty judge authorized the temporary suspension of custody that same night. The social worker explained to me that I would be under provisional guardianship while the process ran. But for me, that night was a relief. Mrs. Peterson received me with tears in her eyes, hugged me tight, and said, "You'll never sleep alone in fear again." I stayed there sitting with her on the sofa with the TV on low. Her son gave me a blanket and hot chocolate. And that night, I wasn't just welcomed, I was saved. My parents lost custody. And for the first time, everything that destroyed me began to transform into a chance to start over. The following week seemed like a dream. Not one of those beautiful and magical ones, but that strange type that mixes fear, relief, and uncertainty. The type of dream where you wake up still trying to understand if you're safe or if you'll wake up again locked, alone, in the dark. In the first days after the suspension of custody, I remained under the guardianship of Child Protective Services, but I stayed lodged at Mrs. Peterson's house by emergency decision. She had already become my trusted figure, and each morning I woke up to the smell of ready coffee and the sound of the whistling kettle. The more I understood how cruel my old life had been, and how much that new life had a taste of home I had never known before. Her house was simple, but alive. Every corner had a story. Every meal was made with patience and purpose. I helped set the table. I washed the dishes. I listened to old music she played on the record player. Gradually, I started smiling again. One afternoon, she came home with a different expression, a mix of nervousness and decision. She called me to sit in the living room. "Lucas, I talked to the social worker, and I decided to file for legal guardianship." I was speechless. She took my hand with hers, firm and warm. "I know I'm not your mother, and I never want to erase what you lived through. But I also know that no one can grow up with so much abandonment. You deserve to have someone on your side, and I want to be that person, if you'll let me." I didn't cry. I collapsed. I hugged Mrs. Peterson as if I were clinging to the edge of a cliff. And in that instant, all the loneliness I had accumulated since I knew myself as a person left my body. I stayed there for minutes, sobbing in her lap, feeling for the first time that someone wanted me. Not out of obligation, but out of love. The process was quick. My parents didn't even show up to the main hearing. The judge read the reports, the complaints, the evidence, the recordings, the photos, the call records. There was no defense. They were considered negligent, emotionally abusive, and unfit to exercise custody. Mrs. Peterson received definitive guardianship and, soon after, filed for a protective order. Because even with the loss of custody, my parents continued prowling around. They sent senseless letters, notes slipped through her gate, saying I had been poisoned against them, that she had destroyed our family. Once my father showed up in a car, stopped across the street, and stayed there for hours, watching me through the classroom window. The school called the police. He left before the patrol car arrived. It was then that Mrs. Peterson said, "This has to stop." With the help of the public defense, she got a measure that prevented my parents from approaching within a 500-meter radius. The judge signed it as urgent, given the recurrence of invasive behavior. 2 months later, they moved to another city. I learned later that they were trying to restart their lives away from gossiping neighbors. I never saw them again. And you know what's strangest? I don't miss them. I don't feel guilty. I don't regret it. My parents weren't victims of injustice. They were victims of their own choices. Today, looking back, I understand clearly what was love and what was neglect. Growing up with Mrs. Peterson was relearning what affection is. What it is to have someone asking if you ate, how your day was, if you slept well. It was seeing someone get up at dawn when I had nightmares, prepare tea, and sit with me until I went back to sleep. With her, I got my first report card with all blue grades. I went on my first school trip with a homemade lunch. I got my first birthday cake with my name written in icing. With her, I learned what love was. She went to my high school graduation, all dressed up, with eyes full of tears and the camera shaking in her hand. In the school speech, they asked me to write a line about who I most admired. I wrote, "My mother, even though she didn't give birth to me. She saved me from being invisible. Today I'm an adult. I'm in college. I have my own little corner, but I never spend a Sunday without having lunch with her. She's older now, with all white hair and slower steps, but her heart remains firm, like a wall. If they ask me if I regret it, I answer firmly, no, I would have done it all again. Because in that dark house I was taken from, maybe I would never have survived. But in that bright and living house of Mrs. Peterson's, I learned what it is to exist. Time passed like someone whispering changes. Gradually, the scared boy, who trembled in the dark waiting for parents who never came, was left behind. In his place, someone stronger emerged, quieter too, but with deep roots. Roots that weren't born from the womb, but from affection, care, and love of a woman who owed me nothing and gave me everything. I grew up, I graduated, I worked, I saw Mrs. Peterson age with dignity and pride, and I never stopped calling her mother. It was at one of those Sunday lunches with the smell of roast meat in the air and the kettle whistling in the kitchen that she sat with me with her always serene look and said, "Son, I wanted to talk about something." I knew by the way she held her teacup that something delicate was coming. Your parents, your biological parents, contacted the public defense. They asked if there was any possibility of a visit. They said they don't want to interfere in your life, just see you. Once. The first reaction was silence. The old silence that enveloped me when I lived with them. Only now that silence wasn't fear. It was reflection. She continued, "I don't like them, you know, and I don't trust them either. But what I think is that no child should be prevented from seeing the parents they have, even if it's to discover on their own that they haven't changed. Only you can decide that." I never knew where Mrs. Peterson got so much greatness from. Any other person would have said no firmly for everything they did to me. But she just wanted me to be free, even to choose to forgive. I accepted the visit. It was strange, emotionally weird. No hugs, no crying, no explosion of reconciliation. It was a dry, formal meeting. My father was balder, worn down. My mother no longer wore makeup, and her rigid posture seemed to have given way to the years. They didn't apologize. They just said they had tried their best and hoped I was well. "I am," was all I replied. We talked for an hour. Nothing deep. They talked about the city where they live now, asked what I did for a living. I responded politely, and when they left, I realized that was the first time I saw them as they really were. Broken people. People who failed and continue failing, but who somehow still carry the title of parents with me. Not by merit, but by origin. After the first visit, others happened, sporadically. We never created a bond, but I created a form of distant, respectful coexistence. I treated them like acquaintances, who were once very important, and now are memories organized on life's shelf. Gradually, they became almost invisible again, only this time by my choice, and not by abandonment. Once, returning from one of these visits, I found Mrs. Peterson watering her plants on the porch. She looked at me, waited for me to sit beside her, and asked quietly, "So, was it worth it?" I took a deep breath, looked at her wrinkled hands carefully working the soil. "It was worth it, Mom. Now I know who they are, and I also know who you are." She smiled, a smile full of peace, of that type that only those who have conquered life know how to give. Today, when I tell my story, I don't hide anything. I talk about my biological parents clearly, without hatred, but also without romanticism. I talk about the loneliness, the locks, the silences, and especially I talk about the light I found in that house next door. Mrs. Peterson was, is, and always will be my mother. Not by blood, but by soul, by presence, by love, and that's what saved me.
When is that one time that you had to turn to the dark side? One day, my daughter came back from school and ran into my arms like she was scared. I could feel her shaking, so I took her inside and made some French toast, which was her favorite food. I thought she just had a really bad day and missed being at home, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Once she calmed down, she told me, "Mommy, something happened today, and I think I'm supposed to tell you about it." An uneasy knot formed itself in my heart when she told me that the school counselor had called her into his office for a special game. He handed my daughter a stuffed unicorn and told her that this new game was very popular with the children, which made my daughter excited and eager to learn. Then the counselor made her point the unicorn between his legs and push on it repeatedly. My daughter told me how he made weird faces at times and then closed his eyes and leaned back towards the end. I was so horrified and felt a wave of nausea rush through my body, so I had to go to the bathroom and throw up. What kind of sick person would make a 7-year-old girl do this kind of thing? Not to mention he worked at a school, and it was me who willfully sent my daughter near his vicinity. I kept bouncing between blaming myself and wanting to burn the entire world. My husband was no longer with us, so it was up to me to stand up for my daughter. I don't know what made me approach the school administration before the police, but that's exactly what I did. and the school administration laughed at me, saying that my daughter was clearly playing a prank. They said they had heard other students make similar jokes about the school counselor, and said that parents should teach their kids not to lie. By the time I made it to the police station, the school had already called them and explained the situation. They thought I was a crazy mother who was trying to give merit to my daughter's filthy lie. I had looked straight into my daughter's eyes when she told me this story, so I knew she was telling the truth. But no one wanted to believe me, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. This is when I remembered something important and ran back home to open my jewelry safe. Inside there was a note that I hadn't looked at for a long time. You see, although I was currently a doctor, I had been a very inexperienced nurse at one point. And one time, a very stern-looking man with a lot of face tattoos walked into our hospital with a bullet wound. No other nurse wanted to treat him since he looked so scary, so they sent me. I convinced myself that everyone deserves treatment and cleaned his wounds with the utmost concentration. I even engaged him in conversation and joked about how he should stay away from bullets in the future. When it was all over, the guy thanked me and handed me a note with his phone number on it. He said, "If you ever need someone taken care of, I won't ask for any payment." I typed in that phone number, and to my surprise, it actually connected. I told him who I was, and he said, "I remember you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought about hanging up. What I was about to do wasn't part of who I had become as a woman, mother, or doctor. But I also wasn't just that. I was a wounded mother, betrayed by an entire system that claimed to protect, but sheltered monsters with diplomas and easy smiles. "What happened?" he asked with a deep voice. "If you got this far, it wasn't for nothing." I tried to speak, but my voice failed. I took a deep breath and swallowed hard. "It's about my daughter," I began. And then, without hiding anything, without embellishments, without self-censorship, I told him everything, from beginning to end. I told him how she came home trembling, how I was preparing rabanadas thinking it was just a bad day, until the moment she held that innocent unicorn in her hands and told me what that damn counselor did to her. I told him about the school laughing in my face, about the police looking at me like I was crazy, and I told him about the emptiness I felt now. The bitter taste of seeing my daughter sleeping, clutching the toy as if the trauma had poisoned it. "Give me his full name," he said after a heavy silence, "and everything you know about him. Address, car, routine, everything." Are you sure? You didn't call out of doubt. You already made your choice. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a lawyer, but I guarantee he'll never touch another child again. It was then that I understood. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I wrote down what he asked for, got everything I knew about the bastard. Names, schedules, even the color of his car and where he went for morning walks. I sent everything by message. Minutes later, he replied with just, "Understood." Nothing more. I went back to my daughter's room. She slept with a peaceful face, as if her little body was trying to forget the most horrible day of her life. I sat on the floor and cried right there in silence. I felt dirty for having resorted to that, but at the same time, I felt alive. For the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something real. The next day, I woke up with my heart racing. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, but my hand was shaking so much I dropped the mug. I picked up my phone. No messages, no calls. Life outside continued normally. My daughter went to school, the other school, because I would never let her go back to that one. I kissed her before she left with her grandmother, and I was alone, with the weight of what was to come. It was only at the end of the afternoon that the phone rang. "It's done," said the voice on the other end. "What does that mean?" "It means he'll never look at any child again. Not with his eyes, not with his heart, if he even had one." The call ended there. My legs went weak. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. That was it. It had happened. But nothing appeared in the newspaper, no news on the radio, no headlines, just silence. I was afraid to ask more, afraid to discover the details. But part of me was at peace. The next day, the school principal called me. She said she deeply regretted the misunderstanding, that they were reevaluating the teaching staff, and that the counselor had requested leave for personal problems. I wanted to laugh, but I just said, "Now it's too late." I hung up, but the consequences began to emerge. The police came looking for me again. They said he had mysteriously disappeared, vanished from the map. No sign of him anywhere, no cameras, no card activity. He simply evaporated. They pretended it was a simple investigation, but I could feel in their eyes that they knew, and that they suspected me. There was no evidence, no fingerprints, No cameras, no witnesses, but they knew. I started sleeping poorly. I had nightmares with siren sounds, with the police knocking on my door, with my daughter looking at me scared. But at the same time, I also dreamed of him paying, crying, feeling fear, feeling what she felt. It was only days later that I received a last message from the number. The debt has been paid. Now move forward. He wasn't the first, and from what I discovered, he wouldn't be the last. I deleted the message, deleted the number, burned the old note, and then I sat in my daughter's room, watching her play in silence. And in that moment, even knowing I had plunged into the shadows, for the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt like I had saved her, that I did what no one else would do. And if someone dared to say it was wrong, I would stare back and ask, what would you do if it were your daughter? That question echoed in my head every day, on loop. It accompanied me while I washed dishes, while I drove to the hospital, while I treated patients who trusted me without even imagining what I had done, without knowing how far a mother can go for justice. And it wasn't just inside my head that things began to change. A week after the counselor's voluntary leave, the school sent an official letter to all parents, with generic apologies about procedures being reevaluated and recent concerns about professional conduct. They were trying to clean the school's image as if it were all just an administrative error. Pathetic. But children talk. My daughter came home at the end of that week saying that a little friend told her that the unicorn man had gone away because he was a bad man, and that other girls from other classes had also cried because of him. I felt my blood freeze. How many children had been hurt while the adults turned their faces away? I knew that what I did wouldn't erase what happened to my daughter. I knew she would still have nightmares, that maybe one day she would go to therapy and cry saying I should have protected her better. But I also knew that that monster wouldn't touch anyone else, that no other mother would have to hear what I heard. And that gave me strength to continue. However, like all temporary peace, this one also began to crack. One day when I went to pick up my daughter at the new school, I saw a black car parked near the gate. 2 men inside. Tinted windows, but still, I noticed they were watching me. I pretended not to see, took my daughter by the hand and went home. That night, another nightmare. But this time, it was different. I dreamed I was being judged. Not in a courtroom. It was something more symbolic. I was in a white room, surrounded by faces without eyes, and a voice repeated, "Good done by wrong hands. Is it still sin?" I woke up sweating. I got up from bed and went to the window. The same black car was parked across the street, motionless. No sign of movement. I picked up my phone, took a photo, called the police disguising my voice so as not to alarm my daughter. They wrote down the license plate, said they would investigate. They never got back to me. 2 days later, I received a summons to give testimony. It was about the disappearance of the school counselor. They alleged he might have been a victim of retaliation or involvement in crime. The blood disappeared from my face. I had been cautious. Too cautious. I hadn't left traces, and the man who helped me was someone from the underworld, invisible to the system. But what if, at the police station, the room was cold? The detective, a woman with hard eyes, asked me direct questions. Did you have any recent contact with the school counselor? No. Any disagreement with him? Only what I formally reported. My daughter reported inappropriate behavior. But the school said they found nothing concrete. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, I replied firmly. She looked at me like someone staring at a puzzle missing pieces. I held her gaze. Inside my stomach was churning, but outside, I was a wall. And did you know anyone who might want to harm him? Probably many people. If what he did to children was a pattern, he must have collected enemies. The detective wrote something down and then dismissed me. I left there staggering, but with the conviction that my silence needed to last. That night, I locked all the doors, turned off the phone, slept with a baseball bat beside the bed. Days later, I was surprised by something that completely threw me off balance. I came home and found my daughter crying in the bathroom. She was holding the unicorn plush in her hands, squeezing it hard, as if she wanted to crush it. "What's wrong, my love?" She took a while to answer. She was sobbing so much she couldn't breathe. When she finally spoke, the words came cutting. I remember everything. I remembered his face. I dreamed. He made me promise I wouldn't tell. That if I told, he would appear at night and take you away. I felt my heart shatter. I knelt down and hugged her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to explode. But I just breathed with her until she calmed down. until her world fit back into a mother's arms. After she fell asleep, I went out on the balcony and faced the starry sky. I had done what I needed to do, but now I wanted more. It wasn't enough to have eliminated one man. I wanted the school, the principal, those who knew, those who laughed at me. They would be next. I wanted the school. That night, between my daughter's sobs and the rage pulsing under my skin, something inside me transformed. I was no longer just the mother seeking justice. I was no longer a woman in a white coat trying to maintain dignity before a rotten system. I was the storm they pretended not to see coming. I took my laptop and started digging, name by name, address by address. I entered the principal's full name in the public records search. I found her participation in educational councils, events, political meetings. She wasn't just an educator. She was a well-connected woman. Photos with councilmen, columns in local newspapers. She gave lectures on educational ethics. The irony corroded me. And then I found what I needed. An old complaint, filed away. 10 years ago, the same principal had been cited in a process involving omission in the face of inappropriate conduct by an employee. But the case had been covered up, archived for lack of evidence. Nothing happens by chance. That was a pattern. I printed everything, put together a dossier. Attached reports from mothers in social media groups. Some, when they saw my anonymous post, sent messages telling about strange behaviors from the same counselor. No one had had the courage to expose it. Most silenced themselves out of fear of retaliation or shame. That's what they did. Covered up. Discredited. Destroyed. But not with me. The following week, I filed a formal complaint against the school administration. I hired a lawyer who had already sued institutions for serious moral damages. I gathered all the screenshots, audios, documents. I did everything legally, carefully, like a surgeon opening a festering wound. The school's response came quickly. A public note in the newspaper saying they deeply regretted that a mother's pain was transformed into unfounded attacks against the honor of dedicated professionals. Hypocrites. I began to be watched. My car was scratched. I received an anonymous letter with a sentence written in cutout letters. You've already caused too many problems. I wasn't intimidated. If they wanted war, I would show them they were playing with fire until they found someone willing to burn everything down. At the hospital, my boss called me to talk. Is everything okay at home? She asked with a loaded voice. Why the question? I retorted. We received an anonymous call saying that maybe you were emotionally unstable. An informal complaint. I held back my laughter. They wanted to destabilize me. They wanted to cut my voice where I was strongest. I'm fine. And if you need an emotional certificate, I can ask my psychologist to write one. It was a lie. I had never done therapy in my life, but I needed to seem unshakable. The next day, my lawyer got a hearing with a prosecutor who, according to him, was the father of 3 girls. When he heard my report, his eyes filled with tears. You bring me names? Evidence? I brought everything, I replied, pushing the dossier across the table. He leafed through it with the attention of a father who had just understood the real danger. I'm going to take this forward. It may take time, but believe me, I won't file it away. When I left that building, my knees were shaking. I didn't know if the prosecutor would keep his word, but it was the first time I saw an adult face react with real empathy, without treating me like hysterical or a liar. But my daughter, she was still fighting her ghosts. One night, I woke up to a scream. I ran to her room and found her in panic, pointing at the closet door. He was there, Mommy! He appeared. I saw him. I hugged her tightly, holding her sweaty little hands. He can't hurt you anymore. Never again. Deep down, I knew that trauma wouldn't go away with a "it's over." That would stick to her like a shadow. But it was my mission now to guide that girl through the darkness with every firm step I took outside. Every name exposed, every action taken, every person held accountable. All of this would be a brick in the protection wall around her. But the enemies multiplied. I received emails from fake accounts, veiled threats. One of them said, "You want to bring down the school? You'll fall with it." I didn't delete it. I saved everything, showed it to my lawyer. He sighed. We're bothering the right people. And then, something happened. An investigative journalist contacted me. He said he saw my complaint and was following the case, that he had internal sources, that there was a pattern of protecting aggressors within the school network, not just at this school. He said that this counselor, the one who disappeared, had already been through other institutions, and that the current principal, guess what, had been responsible for protecting another employee involved in a scandal covered up in the neighboring city. It was bigger than I thought. I was inside a system, a sick system, but I was no longer a fragile piece. I was the short circuit. And deep in my chest, while watching my daughter sleep, I promised myself, as long as I'm alive, no child will be silenced like mine was. That phrase became my fuel, but it also became my sentence. The following days became a careful dance between my work, the veiled threats, and the constant fear of being followed. I started changing my routes. I began leaving my daughter with the neighbor instead of going straight to pick her up at school. I always watched rearview mirrors. I always distrusted cars that slowed down too close. But I continued. The journalist who contacted me got back in touch, this time with something even more disturbing. "I have a recording," he said, in a low tone, almost afraid of being heard even through the call. "Of what?" I asked, with my heart racing. "A conversation between the principal and another employee. It was recorded by a janitor. They talk about controlling the narrative and mention that they can't allow the doctor to destabilize the school's structure. And more, there's a part where she says that the counselor knew too much." The words left me frozen. The bastard who hurt my daughter knew too much? They knew? "Can you send me that?" I asked. "Yes, but be careful. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. And now there are more people watching you than you imagine." Hearing that recording was like taking a punch. The principal spoke coldly. She used expressions like, "The media forgets quickly," and "the institution's reputation is more important than an unbalanced child." I trembled with rage. And more than ever, I felt I was right. They didn't just know what was happening. They chose to protect the aggressor. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked him to double the security measures around the case. He suggested I leave home for a while. Stay in a hotel. Don't tell anyone where you are. Take your daughter and disappear for a few days. We'll file the recordings with the prosecutor's office, with total secrecy. That's what I did. I told the hospital I would take leave for personal reasons. I took my daughter and went to an inn far from the city, a place without much movement, surrounded by forest, with simple cabins. I thought it would be good for her to breathe different air. I thought the world would feel lighter, but trauma travels with us. On a rainy night, she had another crisis. She woke up screaming, saying she heard the unicorn's noise and that the man was going to come through the window. I hugged her tightly, sang softly the song she liked, and swore everything would be okay. But I was shattered. Nothing prepared me to see my daughter fighting with such heavy memories in such a small body. The next day, I received an envelope under the cabin door. No address, no mark, just a sheet with large letters written by hand. "You can run, but you're dragging an innocent child into the fire with you. Stop." I was paralyzed. The first thing I thought was, how did they find us here? I called the inn's administration. They hadn't seen anything. No strangers, no one knew. But someone knew. Someone was monitoring my steps. I made my daughter pack her bag immediately. We drove for almost 3 hours until we stopped in a smaller city where a doctor friend had a country house. I called her, explained briefly, and she welcomed us without hesitation. There, at least, there was some sense of security. But even there, the tension wouldn't leave me. I woke up several times a night with noises that were probably just in my head. Sounds of steps, wood creaking, whispered voices. I was constantly alert. I slept with a knife under the pillow. Meanwhile, the prosecutor filed the first action against the principal, based on the recordings. The journalist published an article that, even with the name suppressed, made it clear who the doctor involved was. The local community exploded, comments calling me unbalanced. Others saying I was too brave to be real. Mothers started talking. One of them, whose son had been transferred from school 2 years before, wrote an anonymous letter that reached me. She reported something similar. Inappropriate touching, strange games with dolls, and the child's fear of being punished if he told. I started gathering everything. It was like putting together a dark puzzle. And the more pieces emerged, the clearer it became. The school was a machine for silencing victims. And now, this machine was trying to crush me. But something inside me, maybe the same instinct that made me call that man in the past, told me I couldn't stop. That if I backed down now, every mother who dared to speak after me would be treated as crazy. That my daughter one day would grow up and understand everything, and would ask me if I fought for her to the end. And I want to be able to look into her eyes and say, yes, I fought until the last thread of strength, but I was exhausting myself. The days in that country house gave me the false sensation of security, as if we were in a bubble protected from reality. But as soon as the night's silence fell, I went back to feeling hunted. My daughter slept better there, maybe because she didn't recognize the environment, maybe by instinct. but I felt like a cornered animal. Every noise, every phone notification, every car headlight at the gate made me jump up. It was on a calm afternoon that everything exploded. The journalist called me. His voice trembled. The story gained traction. It was shared by a national page. The press is looking for names. And is that good or bad? I asked with a weight in my throat. It's going to hurt, but it's necessary. I knew. When you throw the truth at the fan, the dirt doesn't choose where it lands. And I was about to be hit by all the mud that school had hidden for years. The next morning, my name was everywhere. Doctor denounces school abuse network. Victim's mother moves investigation in traditional school. Vigilante mother or unbalanced? What's behind the bombshell complaint? The comments on social media were a battlefield. Half the people called me a hero. The other half accused me of making everything up to gain fame or money. They said I was histrionic, that I influenced my daughter with false memories, that no 7-year-old child could tell that with so many details. I read, felt my stomach turn, and closed the tab. My daughter saw one of these headlines while using the tablet. She turned to me and asked, "Mom, why are they talking about us?" "Because Mommy told the truth, my love, and there are people who don't like to hear the truth." She fell silent, then went back to the cartoon. I went to the bathroom and cried softly, leaning against the door. And then, the unexpected happened. A former teacher from the school contacted me. She had resigned 3 years before. She sent me a message to the email I used to file the complaint and asked to talk in person. We met at a discreet cafe. She was a woman in her 50s. Thick glasses, serious face. She looked around before speaking. "I saw things," she began. "Many things. I suspected the counselor. And the principal. There was a strange tension whenever she talked to him. Excessive care. But I only really understood when a student told me she didn't want to play the unicorn game anymore. She was crying. She was scared. I took this to the principal. And the next day, I received a warning. Either withdraw the complaint, or my professional life would be destroyed. "And you?" I asked. I resigned. I kept quiet. Out of cowardice, out of fear. Until today. She handed me a folder with old reports, internal emails, including a memo from the administration with an extra clause. Any conduct that could denigrate the school's image should be immediately silenced and treated internally. That was gold. Proof that the cover-up was institutionalized. I showed everything to my lawyer. He reacted with wide eyes. This is enough to open a criminal investigation against the administration. That week, the prosecutor who supported me got authorization. The school was officially investigated. Search warrants were issued. And for the first time, the arrogant faces of the principal and her accomplices appeared pale in the news. But with that came the backlash. My bank account was hacked. A considerable amount was transferred to an overseas account. The police called me, insinuating that I might be trying to launder money with the media exposure. My name was dragged through the mud for a few weeks. My medical license was put under evaluation by pressure from an anonymous complaint. I was suspended from the hospital where I worked for institutional prudence. That was it. The machine trying to grind me up. And then, one night, I received a call that made me tremble. "Hi, Unicorn Girl's mom," said a male voice, nasal, mocking. "I hope you're proud. You may have brought down one, but there were more people in this little game. And when the police start digging, you'll realize you messed with a spider web. And you know what the spider does to those who touch it?" The phone hung up. For the first time, in a long time, I felt real fear. Not just for me, but for her, for my daughter, for my mother who was taking care of her while I dealt with lawyers, with journalists, with investigations. I went to the window. In the dark, I swore I saw someone standing in the street, motionless, a shadow. I couldn't identify it, but I understood the message. They were warning you went too far. But what they still didn't know is that there's no too far for a mother with blood in her eyes. If they thought I was going to back down now, it was because they still hadn't met what a woman can become when everything is taken from her. Peace, career, her daughter's innocence. I wasn't going to stop. I was going to finish what I started, even if it was with my own hands. But I didn't need to. The morning after that threatening call, I received news that pierced my chest like an arrow. The principal had been arrested. It wasn't because of me, not directly. The investigation network had revealed something even bigger, a scheme to protect aggressors within the municipal network. Everything tied up with false donations, forged documents, and criminal omissions. She tried to escape, but was caught in a neighboring city, trying to use her sister's name at a cheap hotel. When the police arrived, she claimed she was on leave to take care of her mental health. Ironic. The same woman who laughed at my daughter's pain now said she was shaken. The news exploded in the newspapers. The journalist who had helped me published an extensive article with testimonies from former employees, students, and mothers. And this time, people listened. Because there were faces, document, evidence. Because there were real bodies carrying traumas that could no longer be ignored. In the following days, I received dozens of messages from fathers and mothers, some apologizing for having doubted, others thanking me for speaking up. A woman whose son had taken his own life 2 years before told me she always suspected the school, but no one ever believed her. I cried reading that message. I cried for all the voices that tried before me and were silenced. But the personal consequences were still there. I stayed away from work for months. I had to file a formal lawsuit to reestablish my medical license and prove that the accusations of emotional instability were a setup. I won, but the taste of victory came with the weight of everything I lost. My daughter started therapy. At first, she just drew, didn't speak, made unicorns with sad eyes and windows with bars. But with time, she began to verbalize. The psychologist told me that, although the trauma was deep, she was reacting. She was rebuilding herself. And one day, on the way home, she told me something I keep to this day. Mom, thank you for not pretending nothing happened. That was worth more than any sentence, headline, or legal victory. A year later, I received an invitation to participate in a medical congress on child mental health. I declined. I wasn't ready yet. But when I went to the bookstore one day, I saw my name cited in a book report about the case. They spoke of me as the mother who set silence on fire. I smiled, not out of vanity, but for knowing that that woman, who once prepared rabanadas thinking her daughter was just sad, had become a force that brought down giants. As for the man on the call, I never heard from him again. Neither the first one, the tattooed one I spoke with that night, nor any other involved. It was as if they had dissolved into thin air, a dirty piece of the world that lent me its shadow to do justice, and then disappeared. Today, I live more simply. I moved to a smaller city. My daughter studies at a school where all teachers know her name and her story, where she can breathe. I went back to practicing as a doctor, but part-time. The rest of the time, I dedicate to guiding mothers who went through the same as me. I've participated in investigations, helped lawyers, written articles, some published, others blocked, but all sincere. And with each new report that arrives, each new mother who tells me no one believed me, I remember what brought me here. The smell of rabanadas, my daughter's look, the paper with that tattooed man's number. Today, people call me strong, a warrior. But I know who I am. I'm a woman who saw the abyss in her own daughter's eyes and decided to jump into it to tear the monster out with her own hands. And if that makes me dangerous in their eyes, then great. Because mothers like me, who lost their fear, are exactly the type of woman these monsters should fear. Did you like the story? Then don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories. Here, every story is told with emotion, courage, and that touch of justice everyone loves to see. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. See you in the next video. Until then.